And good morning, good evening. Let me do a quick sound check because this is a little complex. Okay, welcome everyone. Today I am speaking with Christoph Krieg. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Krieg. Okay, excellent. Okay, let me just make sure both of our audio is coming through. Okay, I think we are good. Thank you for joining me. It is my early morning, it is your evening. So thanks for taking time out. And so let's give a little background about why we're chatting here. Let's see if I can figure out these buttons. Oops, what is going on? Screen 3. Okay, too many monitors. So Christoph and I met via Twitter, right? And so I've met many people via Twitter. It's been fantastic. Prior to going to Directions EMEA, I got a message and I didn't recognize your username. It was just a, kind of a random handle on Twitter. It's like, hey, why don't you stop by our booth at Directions EMEA? I was like, great, what's your name? And so we did meet up and I visited your booth and we got to chatting and you mentioned something and I just said, wait, did you know that this is one of my favorite topics of all time? And you looked at me like, what are you talking about? You're crazy, crazy American. And we chatted about address validation. And so for background, I'll let you introduce yourself, but Christoph is with a Business Central ISV. He has a Business Central ISV and he's developing apps. So, Christoph, why don't you briefly introduce yourself and explain, how you got into Business Central ISV development?
Yeah. Thanks. First of all, thank you for having me. And well, to introduce myself, my name is Christoph. And by the way, the Twitter handle is not just a random character. It is my name backwards. So it's if you spell Chris backwards, it's the same. Anyway,
Let me look at that. There you go. I was
yeah,
like SIRHC, Circ. So got it.
it
Okay,
was
very
already
clever.
already taken, so I had to add a number to it, and yeah.
Very
However,
cool.
yeah, as I said, my name is Christoph, and I'm the founder of 365 Business Development. We are a pretty young ISV from Germany and developing apps, as you said, for Business Central. And basically, I'm in the NAV BC business for around 15 years now. Started with Navision 3.7, I guess. So it's a long time ago. And I've worked for end customers. I've worked for multiple Microsoft partners over the time. And in 2018, when Business Central really came up and the new AI language was introduced and everything, I decided to go with my own company. First as a freelancer, later I got some colleagues. Yeah, now we are developing, I think, pretty cool apps, which, as I
I would
said in
agree.
the
Yep.
preparation, everything should be in standard from Business Central. But well, if Microsoft doesn't take care, we do.
Well,
So that's
and let's just briefly talk about that. So the apps that I'm actually envious of the app library that you've developed because the general tools category, shall we say, for lack of a better term, utilities and tools. What I like about them is they have a broad audience, right? So in theory, any customer can utilize these tools or take advantage of them. And that's nice because you're not pursuing, the manufacturing industry or the distribution industry or, the food distribution market. And so it's kind of makes it easier to address a concern that's universal across all customers. I really like that model personally. We have something similar in the Dynamics GP world where I came from, so I can totally relate to it. And so to kind of reiterate what you just mentioned, just prior to going live, you had mentioned that, hey, these are general tools that you would be happy to see in Business Central. Is that right?
yeah, absolutely. And basically, we are all Business Central users because we use it every day. And every single app we developed emerged from just one simple idea. We want to have it easier. We want to have it easy daily work. And it started with creating barcodes. This was the first app we created. Going to our text transmission service for Germany, ERIC, and all the other apps, including the last one with the print agent to finally print directly from BC, just emerged from the simple idea we want to have a much easier life in BC. We love the product, absolutely, and we love where Microsoft is targeting with the product at all, but in some details, we come in place and say, hey, we can do a little better, and let's add this to BC. But it's only about simplification.
Got it. Well, I think that's a very generous perspective from you, that you're okay with Microsoft enhancing Business Central and adding this functionality.
Absolutely.
But I have found, over the years, even if Microsoft does add a particular feature that essentially competes with an ISV solution, very often Microsoft, they're having to do one implementation that they can maintain globally across their product. But ISVs are often able to come up with different clever interpretations, customizations, different variants, and they're able to address a broader market share. So sure, if you want the free version, you can get that in Business Central, but there are quite a few customers who are willing to pay for that enhanced functionality that ISVs offer, even though you might claim, well, it's already available in BC. Well, is it? If you're providing that extra 10, 20%, I think there's often value in that functionality.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally with you. Yeah.
Okay. So I just had some general questions, and well, let me just share that. So just wanted to talk about a few things. You just mentioned how you became a Business Central developer. You have a long history in Nav. And so how did you, okay, let me get some background here. Address validation. And why am I a address validation super geek? And it seems like a really strange thing to say, but I happen to love address validation because I have been working on address validation projects completely coincidentally for 25 years. The first project I worked on that involved address validation was in Redmond, Washington, on the Microsoft campus for Microsoft's internal system builder team, was what it was called. They had hundreds of thousands of customers and resellers, and they needed address validation and deduplication globally. And this was like 1997, 98 maybe. As far as I know, it was technically infeasible or technically impractical to achieve what they wanted at that time. And I'm kind of guessing that the consulting team that they brought in to do that project was fired, because I was brought in to try and help. I walked into that room and said, whoa, you guys are in deep trouble. It was a really, really complex problem to solve at that time because we didn't have web services. Like it was very, very new world. So I looked through my files. That was back in like 97, 98. Well, my next project, coincidentally, was in 2010. In 2010, I was asked to import customers. These were global customers going into Dynamics GP. And they said that data on these customers is a complete mess. Can you help us validate the customer addresses? And it was a real struggle. But I found a person in Europe who had developed a DLL, amazingly, a local client-side DLL that I called using COM, if you remember the VB COM world. And I was able to perform global address validation with a, say, 80+% accuracy on this customer data. I was pretty proud of that, but that vendor just disappeared. I lost contact, didn't reply to messages, so that product is now defunct. But you'll see here, in 2019, I tried to create a Business Central address validation solution. I said, well, hey, this is something I know. I think this would be cool in BC. So I tried to do what you have successfully done. And I didn't pursue it because I essentially didn't have the funds and the attention span and resources to get it done. But I ran into some pretty difficult challenges trying to implement this in Business Central. It's more difficult, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when someone hears address validation, they may think, I'm a clever developer. I just need to call a web service, right? How hard can that be? So tell me more about some of the real world challenges of address validation. And I've been in the trenches, so I kind of know, but you have made far more progress than I did in 2019.
Yeah, the funny thing is, as I started with the product, I was in the same mood. I said, hey, I'm a pretty clever developer. It can't be that complicated. And let me say, I go through some really pain in implementing this in BC. And you have to know, basically, we have two parts in our address validation product. The first one is the simple address validation, which is targeting for online shops, marketplaces, and you import some customer data and you want to validate and autocomplete and whatever. The second part is the address prediction, we call it, the autocomplete feature. And both parts have difficult challenges. And the first thing we did also in 2019, by the way, was the address validation part. And basically the idea came from, I talked to a customer and the customer said to me, hey, we are at this street and this city, and did not mention the postal code. And every time I had to go to Google or something else to find out what's the postal code. And it was not the best behavior to do this. So I decided to do something like this. And the first problem was to find a data supplier which is reliable and which gives you data to on a level we can use in BC. Often the address formatting is totally different to what we have in BC, with just address line 1 and 2 and postal code, country, county, and so on. So you have to cut strings. You have to handle different formats and all this stuff. And if you talk about multiple countries, you got a completely new dimension of what we format data, how the data is formatted in the US, and so on. And we really needed some time and replaced our data supplier, by the way, multiple times.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because of similar problems you had. Our first data supplier just disappeared from the market, and then we had to change really, really fast because we already were live on AppSource and had some customers, and it was important for us that we have no downtime at all. Finally, we found a very, very good data supplier. It's Locate, one of the world's largest address validation or address data supplier, and we provide worldwide data. And what's pretty cool is we don't even have to take care of all these address formatting things, because they do. They format it in the way we need it, and we just have to take care that it fits into the columns of BC and implement it into the whole BC process, like in the ship to address in a sales order, for example, or whatever.
And to kind of go back to 2 points that you mentioned that I don't know that a listener will fully appreciate. One is your data source provider. And you would think, hey, I'm going to go out there and find this data provider that provides address validation. I'm going to sign up and all is great. It's not that easy, trust me. So I just looked at my list from
Absolutely.
2019. I think I have 12 different address data providers that I found. Some of are country specific, right? Like I had an Australia one, a New Zealand one, because you encounter certain challenges in different countries. So that's number one, just finding a provider. Number two, even if you find that provider, they will say, which API do you want to call? You're like, what do you mean? I want to call the address validation API. And the one I worked with said, we have 5. I was like, what? Why do you have 5 APIs? Well, you see, we have a US API. So if most of your addresses are in US, you can use this API to get better results, greater accuracy, better suggestions, things like that. Huh. Okay. Well, what if I have to validate Italy, Germany, France? Oh, well, then you need to use our global API. And the behavior of the APIs with this provider, completely different. It was a different API call, different parameter, different payload return. It was an entirely different implementation calling their US API than their global API. It's like, okay. And when I called the global API, the data quality was very different than if I called the US API. So every single country you try to interact with and validate is going to behave slightly differently. If I try to validate an address in India, it is an entirely unique challenge to validate an Indian address versus an Argentina address versus a Guatemalan address, and unfortunately it is messy. And so you and I, interestingly, both had a vendor just disappear off the face of the earth. And my impression is this is not a highly lucrative market, right? So
Yeah.
there is a risk of these vendors going away just because they are not profitable or the service is not making enough money. So that is a challenge. And that applies to the ISV market as well. I'm struggling, and we can talk later about this, about how this is sold to customers. I just spoke last night with a colleague and I said, hey, we should check out this address validation tool that Christoph has. And her response was, well, I don't know that my customers need it. So, well, they will say they don't need it until they see it and realize how it changes their experience in Business Central. It's not just address validation. Did I get the zip code wrong? What you have developed changes, it fundamentally alters the data entry experience of a Business Central user. And so that's the second fundamental challenge. It's not just about calling a data API. The other big challenge I had in 2019 is, how do I expose this? How do I produce a user experience in Business Central that offers value? It was actually quite a bit harder than you would think, right? An interactive address validation. And do you want to kind of briefly show the distinction and do a quick demo of what it looks like to validate addresses in Business Central?
Yeah, sure. But let me add one or two
Okay.
things first. You mentioned the different data sources for global address, for US address, for Europe address, and so on. And that's really a big problem. But it's not just the different data source and the different response you get back. It's also the pricing. The pricing is different between the services.
Yes.
So often the
Yes.
data supplier come and say, okay, you want to query against the US, no problem, it's whatever. And you query against a Europe address, no problem, but it's another price. And
Yep.
this is something which is not that easy to handle, especially if you want to make some commercial app from it. So what we did, we created an middleware in between. That's what we call 365 Business API. And inside of this API, we have an address validation service, which is normalize all the different endpoints into one. And so we have just to take care about one payload we get from our API. And the whole magic is happening in the background on our API services.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So
Well, and thank you for that reminder because I forgot about that. I was looking back at my 2019 notes, and one of the fundamental business challenges that I was facing to produce an ISV solution was I literally had in my notes, how do I charge customers? Do
Yep.
I make them sign up with this data provider and have their own plan that they pay for their own queries? Well, how do I choose which API? And it's a really messy problem when my product really relies upon a third-party data subscription. So to your point, it is a business problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the second thing is, I often hear this from other ISVs, other bars. Our customer doesn't need any address validation.
Yep.
Of course, they don't need it because they don't know if something exists.
Yep.
And the thing is, I'm not sure how it is in the US or so, but at least in Germany, our parcel services are a little complicated, let's say this. And if you ship a lot of packages and you do not format the address in the way the parcel service is expecting it, they charge you a fee. And
Ah,
the fee is often much higher than our address validation per address. So
yep.
it's a simple math, you know?
ROI. Yep.
Absolutely.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's take a quick look at your product, and there we go. So let me try and figure out. So can you move the little Skype stuff off your screen? It just
Oh,
shows up
of
as a
course.
gray
Yeah.
square. Okay, so I'm going to do some manual live stream editing here with the magic. Okay, your screen should be active.
Okay. So what I want to show is what I called earlier the second feature we have. It's the address prediction because this is something which brings a lot of value to BC in the situation when you create a new customer, for example, or a new vendor or a new shipping address or whatever. And what we did, we created two bindings. Let me say it this way: one on the name field and one on address field. And we search for totally different things. So when we just use, let me type it this. When we type in the name field, we are looking for companies, organizations, and all this stuff. We get
Fascinating.
the address, we get the phone number, we get homepage, and we're working on adding some more features like in the future getting VAT registration number because we already have an VAT validation service in place and so on. So, and it's pretty fast because you just need to know the name of the company and we take care about the rest.
So can you type in the name Microsoft?
Of course.
This will be a good demo. You probably have done this before, but this was one of my address validation demos. And so Microsoft, interesting. Okay. And so you have the ability to load more because obviously Microsoft has a lot of locations.
You
And
can go and say Microsoft Redmond. So
can
you
you say
can combine
Microsoft Fargo?
what? Fargo?
Fargo. Look at that. So shout out to all the Dynamics GP folks in the Midwest, Microsoft Vision Building Fargo, North Dakota. I have been there more times than any other client or travel location. So that's fantastic. So that was my go-to address validation. If I can figure out the Microsoft Fargo address, that passed my test. Excellent. Okay, sorry for the interruption.
No, no, great. And one thing, after 15 years, maybe I can say I'm a little bit of an old guy in the NAV VC business thing, and I have learned to work inside of NAV without mouse. And this is something which was very important. I don't use the mouse now. I just use the cursor and
Nice.
press enter, and you can work without any mouse usage. And as I said, in
Wow.
the name field, we are looking for the name, and an address, we are looking just for the address without any corporate or organizational
Very nice.
information. So that's basically the whole address prediction thing, and what you get is a completely validated and formatted address for the country specific, for the country specific formatting.
Now, what if I attempt to enter an address that cannot be validated or has a postal code error? Are you dealing with that in a particular way? So maybe I got a partial address from Malaysia and some of the address has errors. How do you surface that? That was another challenge I had.
So let's disable the address prediction for the moment.
Okay.
Otherwise, it would be very difficult to insert some crap data.
Got it.
But let's say I'm not prepared for this because
Sorry to put you on the spot.
I just used the wrong address I just missed the letter in our address, and I just say so let's say this is an incomplete address, and it's also a typo here. It should be an E inside, and you can use an action called validate address.
Yep.
And in this case, small window appears and say, hey, you type this, it doesn't exist, but we found this, and this is the postal code, and so on. And we automatically remove the country region code if it's a domestic country.
Excellent.
If it's your country.
Got it.
So, and after this, you say, yep, save it, and that's all.
Fantastic. Yeah, that was a key challenge because, well, are you done with your demo?
Just
okay.
Let me one
sure.
Additional thing regarding key challenge. It is absolutely a key challenge, especially after Microsoft has changed the behavior of handling fields. When you go out of a field or jump out of a field, BC is now saving the record.
Yep.
And of course, we initially hooked into the onModify trigger to validate address data. This is not possible anymore, so we had to solve this on another way, but we did. So that's fine. And another challenge was, especially for this autocomplete stuff. Obviously, it's the control it in, so it's JavaScript, and control it ins are bound inside of an iframe. So you have to escape from the iframe, and that was pretty challenging.
Yeah, the UI components back in 2019, I worked with a developer. We looked into it. We just didn't have a clean way to have the dynamic as you type drop downs and list, and we were trying to use the Business Central UI elements, and it was just limited and kind of clunky. It was not a good user experience. And so what you've done with that, as you type drop down, the validation list, those are critical features of address validation, because it is not an ideal world of I enter the address and here's the corrected one. It's like, well, maybe this is what you're looking for, and there are a few fields that match, a few fields that don't. It can get messy. So nice job, honestly.
As I said, this was really pain to get out of the iframe.
Yes, and another thing I kind of a lesson we learned trying to deal with JavaScript in Business Central is if one thing changes about their object model on a page, everything just breaks.
Yeah.
Your code just stops working. And so we built a solution. Microsoft changed the object IDs. Nothing worked for us. We're like, this is dangerous territory. It requires constant maintenance, constant feeding and care just to make sure that nothing's going to break in the next release. So I have a question from Christian Lenz in the chat. He asks, is there a function for validating customer records in batch or in bulk? So if I import 100 customers, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, it is. We ship 3 reports, I guess, for vendor, customer, and contact. I'm not sure, maybe also a fourth one for sales and purchase orders. But at least the three for vendor, customer, and contact. And one thing to be mentioned, and at this point, what we always prefer for new customers from us is install the app. You get 30 days for free. Just validate your whole database at our cost, and then start working with a clean database.
Yep.
So you don't have to pay for of course, if we are talking about millions of addresses, that's another topic.
Right.
But for a regular, mid-size, small-size company, install it in a trial, validate your data, complete your data, and then start working with the address prediction.
And the project I did in 2010 involved a customer import into the ERP system. They were getting a feed of all of their sales from somewhere. I was having to import those customers and validate the addresses on import. Do you have a similar mechanism that your product can be called from an integration or a configuration package or something like that?
Well, by default, you can just configure in our address validation setup to listen to address modifications. So we just hooked into the on modify trigger, on insert trigger, and all this stuff.
Smart.
And additionally, we provide what we call internal API, where you just can feed custom data entities like custom tables or whatever, and we validate the data and get back in the same structure as you served it to us.
Very nice. That was a big challenge. I had to bring those in. I'm validating them. I had to flag the records to say, hey, you need to follow up on these. I didn't have reporting in the GP solution that I did. And so it was a little cumbersome for the user. They're having to review things one by one. So I didn't have those event mechanisms like what you've implemented. So it was a little more limited technically, but that's fantastic. That's a common scenario. So
let me
go ahead.
Add one thing. It's about the structure, the database structure of NAV or BC. Let me say BC. What we did wrong in the early days of our app was we built upon the default entities like customer, contact, sales order, vendor, and all this stuff. But what happens if you create a new customer? It automatically creates the contact. So you have doubled the address. And we, in the first day, checked the address twice. Because we have two entities with two unchecked addresses. What we now did is we created a new entity called address data, where we collect all addresses from all over the application to make sure that we just validate an address once. And it gave us the opportunity to highlight. So we use the style expressions thing in BC to highlight addresses which are not validated in the contact form, for example, or the contact page and the customer page and so on.
Got it. So you have architected a proper solution. I've only approached it from a much simpler perspective of I see address, I validate it, but you're finding all the complications and downsides, and not only through your aggregation of the API calls and making that a single source rather than having different API calls by region, but the address aggregation within BC, that's clever. I would not have thought of that. And so I think the lesson for me is to share address validation is tougher than you could possibly imagine. You will think, I have an address. How hard can it be? I'm just going to call an API, get a feed. Just trust me. You can put together a bubblegum and string solution. Sure, that may work for you or your customer in a limited sense, but a proper comprehensive address validation solution, it requires a fair amount of work. And so I totally empathized with everything you've done. I understand it, and like I feel it in my soul. As an address validation super geek, I appreciate everything. So that is awesome. And so to the customer or partner who says, well, why would I buy this solution and actually pay money for this when I can just write this myself? Like, can you share the ROI? I don't want to lock you into pricing, but like my understanding is this is an economical way to go versus trying to do it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a lot of discussions with other partners and other clever developers, who said exactly what you said. I can do it my own. It's not that hard. It's just an address. So come on. And well, I learned to just answer, okay, give it a try. We talk in a month. So it's not that easy, and you have to stick to it, and well, you have to go to a lot of pain.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you for that. That was what really spurred this discussion. When you mentioned address validation, I snapped to attention at your booth. If you remember, I was like, "Wait a minute, is this like on camera? Are you joking with me?" So a few other things I wanted to ask you about as a relatively new ISV. What are your impressions about being a Business Central ISV in 2022, and how's it going? I'm seeing challenges from different angles, and any thoughts or from your perspective?
Well, first of all, it's what I had to learn on the hard way, to be honest, is it's all about the community, and it's all about working together, collaborate, and talk to other partners, VARs, ISVs, and so on. What we first started was we just focused on app source, and from our experience, app source in the US is working pretty good, to be honest. In Europe,
not so much.
Not so much.
Very interesting. I've not heard that before. So,
well, we got a lot for our scaling. For our scaling, a lot of requests from the US, from other partners, from customers, and they are not that, let me say, afraid of trying things in their sandboxes. On the other hand, in Europe, especially in Germany, they find us on app source, they go to their partner, and that's, if the partner doesn't know you, that's the reason why we were at directions. It's the same like the disappearing data supplier for address data. You do not trust a company you don't know, and it's pretty natural. So
that is very interesting, and I have heard that perspective from a different angle, that the European partners may be more protective of their customers and a little leery of other parties coming in and getting involved in the relationship for various reasons. That is very interesting. Yeah, in the US, at least from the Dynamics GP perspective, partners sold ISV solutions. It's just, we're used to it. It's like, oh, yeah, you really want this one, and I know Sam over here, and we're going to buy a solution. We had that relationship. So to your point about those relationships, I totally agree. We had a very close-knit ecosystem, and everyone knows, okay, that solution needs to be brought in here. And we weren't afraid of that happening. So that is interesting to hear. I wouldn't have thought of that.
Well, it's no offense against the European partners, not at all. It's totally natural from all the history we have. And as I said, I worked for a long time for Microsoft partners as well, and I totally understand and totally got the behavior. But you have to say the Dynamics community is growing together more and more. And these boundaries are getting to fall, and then we start collaboration with more and more partners, and they understand we don't want to get their customers. We want to add functionality, and we want to add simplicity for their customers. And so they don't have to use it, they don't have to build it, they don't have to support it. We do
Yep.
all this stuff, and they got their piece of the cake, and
their customers happy.
And their customers happy.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I have heard some concerns like, well, is this ISV, going to be around in a few years? And we haven't had to deal with that in the Dynamics GP world because many of the ISVs have been around for well over a decade. So they were just known entities, right? And so it wasn't really a concern. So it'll be interesting to see how things shake out. Now, you mentioned part, but one of the questions I had was, do you have a perspective of serving Europe as an ISV versus serving the US versus, say, other regions, Asia, Africa? And from a US perspective, I've found my impression is that US customers and US partners prefer to work with an entity with a US presence. It is challenging to work with European time zones and communication challenges sometimes. And if you go to Asia, it's even more difficult. And so what has your experience been trying to offer an ISV solution to different regions?
It's exactly the same what you said. So from our perspective, if you work with it, or if you got an request from an American customer, the first question is, do you have a subsidiary in the US?
Yep.
No, we don't have. And well, that's at some point that's the point where we lost communication and we lost interest by the customer. But to be honest, it's pretty much the same in Europe, I guess. So if you come as an ISV from the US, I think it's also small ISV from the US. It's also difficult to land in Europe.
Yep.
So I think it's basically the same from both sides. But yeah, as I said, the main difference from my perspective is that the customers in the US are not that much afraid of playing around in their sandboxes, just poking around, installing some interesting stuff. And well, one thing we always try to do is if we had an idea what we can do better in BC and to create an app for, yep, we start investigating, is there something in place right now? So what really often happens is customers came to us, for example, for address validation. They ask us, are you from the US? No, we are not. Okay, they are gone. And a few months later, they come back and say, okay, there's no real alternative at this point, yep, so let's give it a try. Yep. And of course, there's some challenges with, yeah, time zones, with language and all these stuff. But yeah, if you want, you can solve all these problems.
Yeah, and I think over time, U.S. partners, probably partners who work with you, they will get comfortable with your product. They will be able to sell and support autonomously. They will become less reliant upon you. You know, they'll figure out if they have an occasional support issue. And my experience is I think they'll be willing to sell your product if they like it, right? And so that relationship is key. So like after I met with you, I was like, I went to my US friends. I was like, hey, folks, check this out. This is pretty cool. And I did it for another product. I was like, did you know this existed? And they're like, I've never heard of this, because that partner only has a European presence. So I think US partners and customers, our assessment from EMEA, we're missing out on some really, really good ISV solutions. And it's up to us to develop those relationships so we can start offering these products because customers need them. They want them. Customers get value. And hey, yes, there's going to be a challenge if this ISV is out of Germany, but we'll work it out, right? And as long as it's kind of the partner playing that middleman, it's a little more efficient than every single customer trying to interact with you in Germany, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm on board. I've introduced you to several people I know because I think you have some interesting solutions, and same with another ISV I met at EMEA. So it was really great to just have that eye-opening experience that, wow, these are literally European-only ISV solutions that we've never heard of in the US. So to any partners out there, like, think about it. It's worth the investment to find some good solutions. They are out there, and you may have never heard of them. So sometimes you have to travel to the European conference to get that introduction.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And with that, a quick recap, if I can figure this out. So we talked about address validation. You mentioned barcode. Now, did you develop your barcode product before Microsoft introduced the additional barcode fonts?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so does your product still do things that the Microsoft barcode fonts can't?
It will. We will release a new version in a few days. And there we're adding some pretty cool features, I guess.
Okay.
For example, you can now place an image inside of your QR code.
Ah,
A
nice.
company image, what you know, made from Twitter, for example,
Yep.
and control the coloring a little more. And I think we support just 20 barcodes, 1D and 2D barcodes overall, barcode formats. So I think that's a little more than Microsoft does in standard.
Got it. And my understanding is that, as you mentioned, I believe the 2D barcodes are becoming common for governmental reporting, tax regulations. My colleague has a solution for Dynamics GP that adds these 2D barcodes because certain governments are requiring it on every single invoice. And they're scanning these barcodes in order to enforce tax compliance. So it's becoming much more common. I don't know that it's going to catch on in the US, but I know in many other countries it's becoming more common. So that's a great example. So someone will say, well, Microsoft does 2D barcodes. Yeah, but if you don't want it to be ugly, maybe you want a nice looking barcode, maybe you want your logo in there, like, hey, that might be worth a few dollars a month, right? To make it branding and not just a black and white barcode. So I think that's where ISVs can offer value. And you showed me at the conference your print agent product, which fortunately, I avoid printers like the plague. I hate printers. I have my family printer that I have to support. It's enough for me. But for companies that have printers and they need to print documents out of Business Central, you had a fascinating product called Print Agent that helps you manage your on-site, multi-site printers and redirecting jobs there, right?
Yeah, correct. What we did is we tried to get the most comfort out of BC in terms of printing, not for a sales company or a small company, but it's important, for example, for manufacturing, for warehouse processes where you still print things. Yeah. And it's, from my perspective, it was pretty annoying to download a PDF file, click on it, click print again. And yeah, there are other solutions on the market, for example, Universal Print or ForNAF, of course, but we created a little bit different solution because we wanted to maintain the printer completely in BC. Just install the printer on your local environment, on your print servers, of one or many print servers, how many you have in your organization, and import them, connect them to BC, and just configure them with duplex, with printer paper tray selection, with all the features your printer has, and then use what you know from the old NAV days. So just use a printer selection, say user Steve is printing on printer 1, user Chris is printing on printer 2 for all reports, but for sales invoice, I want to use simplex only and not duplex mode. And in the past, we had to copy or reinstall the printer locally twice, once with the settings for duplex, once with the settings for simplex.
Uh,
And we want to get rid of that and created all this configuration stuff in BC.
got
So
it.
you just have to do it at one place and not on several servers, especially when you have multiple locations, what we have, for example, then it's so easy to just specify the printer and the paper trays you want to use inside BC once, and then just click print and the printer starts. So it's pretty funny, to be honest. We have 2022 and we are talking about printers, but
Yep.
it's still a thing. It's still
Yeah.
a
I
topic
mean,
which customers need to solve.
a pick ticket in a warehouse, a packing slip, right? All of these things still end up on paper for
Yeah.
better or worse. And once again, Microsoft kind of has some printing options in Business Central, but once you start using them, you kind of realize this isn't the most refined thing in the world for any given business process. So this is where ISV step in and they take it the last mile and refine it and really handle some use cases that are challenging even for Microsoft to have to deal with. So I think there's always a role for that ISV solution, even if Microsoft steps into certain functional areas.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was great. Happy to geek out about address validation anytime. It's just, one of those things I've literally spent 20 years intermittently focusing on. And yeah, it's a great topic. And what makes it kind of fun is that people really underestimate it. And so I just kind of chuckle. And it's like,
Me
okay,
too.
yeah. Yep. And you're just like you said, give it a try. Let me know how that works out for you. And then you get the phone call a couple weeks later. It's like, yeah, this is harder than I thought. Yeah, that's how things often go. So thank you very much, Christoph. It was great chatting with you. Thank you for reaching out. It was great meeting you at EMEA. And yeah, we're going to stay in touch.
Thank you for having me again. And yeah, I'm looking forward for you.
Okay. Thanks everyone else for watching and joining us.